Now that Baldur's Gate 3 has been out for more than 3 months, you might be getting tired of Astarion's antics and be looking to expand your horizons by trying other RPGs. Unless you're the type of player starting your 5th playthrough right now. If that's the case, no judgment here. I'm currently making a Githyanki Bard character for the memes. But if you want to switch things up, then I've got you covered, because in this video, we're going to take a look at 10 RPGs you should play after Baldur's Gate 3. This video is sponsored by Manscaped, the most trusted brand in male grooming and hygiene products. Manscaped's Performance Package 5.0 Ultra includes everything you need to clean up your image from head to toe. Introducing the Lawnmower 5.0, the perfect tool for tidying up around your tool. The ceramic blades ensure a close, comfortable shave every time. But my personal favorite in the package is the Weed Whacker 2.0 ear and nose hair trimmer. I have been using this bad boy on the regular since my last Manscaped promo. A lot of dudes walking around with their nostril hairs looking like a mind flayer. Don't be that guy. Trim your nose hairs, boys. Built with skin-safe technology, the Weed Whacker 2.0 is designed for you to comfortably clean up those pesky nostril and ear hairs, so you can look fresh and clean. All Manscaped trimmers are cordless, waterproof, and rechargeable. The Performance Package 5.0 Ultra also includes Crop Preserver liquid deodorant, Crop Reviver toner spray, and anti-chafing boxer briefs. And right now, my viewers can get an incredible deal on Manscaped. Click on the link in the description and use code BIGDAN at checkout for free shipping and 20% off your order. Number 1, Starfield. Nah, I'm just messing with you, bro. Can you imagine if I actually put that garbage on this list? Number 1, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. After getting your fill of BG3, why not take a look at the original BioWare games that started it all? Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2 were revolutionary titles that propelled BioWare to one of the most beloved and well-respected RPG developers. And over 20 years later, these games are still incredibly fun. There are certainly some aspects which cannot compare to Baldur's Gate 3. It doesn't have the same level of cinematic presentation. Most of the dialogue in the game doesn't have voice acting, and obviously the graphics don't look as good. But the gameplay, storytelling, and immersion still hold up incredibly well even to this day.
Go for the eyes, Boo! Go for the eyes! Yeah!
The combat will likely take a bit of getting used to. It's what's called real-time with pause, meaning all actions on the battlefield play out simultaneously, but you have the opportunity to pause at any time to queue up different spells and abilities, reposition squad mates, etc. Generally, I prefer real-time with pause combat more than turn-based. Battles play out much faster, and you feel like a god when manipulating a perfect strategy to take down your opponents. On the flip side, there are a lot more trash mobs and throwaway fights that you can just sort of mindlessly auto-attack your way through, so it's a double-edged sword. If you have to choose just one game to play, I would recommend Baldur's Gate 2. It has deeper writing, particularly for companion characters, including romance and companion quests. Plus, it has John Irenicus, who is one of the greatest video game villains of all time.
Gods, no! He comes! He's here! I cannot be caged. I cannot be controlled. Understand this as you die, ever pathetic, ever foolish.
If you like the world of Baldur's Gate 3, you owe it to yourself to check out the games which started this saga. Number 2, Pathfinder Kingmaker. Released in 2018, Pathfinder Kingmaker is a sort of spiritual successor to the OG Baldur's Gate games. It captures the same style of epic adventure, real-time with pause combat, and impactful story choices. During the early days of the lockdown, I sunk nearly 200 hours into this game on multiple playthroughs, and it's easily one of my favorite strategy RPGs. Pathfinder is an offshoot of Dungeons & Dragons. The rule set is fairly similar, but Pathfinder has some of its own unique quirks as well, which Owlcat Games did a great job capturing with Kingmaker. One of the best parts of the game is the massive amount of variety in class builds. If you like creating multi-classes or testing out a variety of specialty builds, Kingmaker is a dream game, and the story is an incredible journey as well. Without getting into spoiler territory, the core story takes you through a multi-year epic journey as you establish a new kingdom in an untamed land and tackle world-shattering crises that threaten your very existence. The core gameplay is a mix of questing, combat, exploration, and managing your kingdom through appointing advisors, passing decrees and decisions, allocating resources to build up your capital and surrounding towns. I've been itching to replay Kingmaker for a long time, but it is a massive time commitment, as you can easily spend anywhere from 60 to 100 hours on a single playthrough. But if you have the time, Kingmaker is well worth the journey, and you can usually pick up the game for around $20, which is an absolute steal. Number 3. Dragon Age Origins. Out of all the games on this list, this is the one that is most similar to Baldur's Gate 3. You control a party of 4 well-written dynamic companions, make impactful story choices, experience cinematic storytelling, and tackle an epic threat that dares to take down the entire world. And meanwhile, you and at least one of your companions are infected with a darkspawn taint that will inevitably take your life. Dragon Age was BioWare's attempt at blending old-school CRPGs with modernized combat and cinematic storytelling. You can control your characters from an old-school top-down perspective, or switch to an over-the-shoulder camera. The combat is also real-time with pause, but one of the unique things about the system in Origins is that you can customize your companion's AI by setting up different tactics. For instance, you can trigger them to drink a health potion if their HP drops below 50%, or a whole other host of actions based on specific criteria. This allows you to set up complex battle strategies without needing to micromanage every one of your characters constantly. But the most unique claim to fame of DAO are the origin stories. Depending on what type of character you create at the start of the game, you will go through one of 6 completely different prologue sections. The backgrounds are Mage, Dwarf Noble, Dwarf Commoner, Human Noble, City Elf, and Dalish Elf. And your origin of choice doesn't only affect the prologue, it provides lots of unique dialogue throughout the game, and even some specific quest choices that are only available to certain origins. And of course, no BioWare game would be complete without great writing, great characters, romance, and story choices. While the gameplay can feel a bit clunky and outdated, Dragon Age Origins is an absolute must-try experience for RPG enjoyers. Number 4. Cyberpunk 2077. Despite its issues at launch, Cyberpunk 2077 is one of the best cinematic RPGs we've seen in the past 5 years. And while the gameplay is incredibly different compared to Baldur's Gate 3, many RPG fanatics like myself absolutely love both these games. The presentation and immersion factor of Cyberpunk is unmatched by any game I've ever played. I absolutely love getting lost in this world and letting the hours pass as I complete quests, explore the city, and meet all sorts of wacky and interesting characters. And on top of this, Cyberpunk has some of the best combat I have ever played in an RPG shooter. The overhaul CDPR made to the skill system in the 2.0 update added a lot of unique abilities and buffs to the game, and there are tons of different ways you can approach your build and combat style, which adds to replayability. Cyberpunk also has a number of significant story choices and compelling writing that we've come to expect out of CDPR games. The branching paths are not quite as significant as The Witcher 3, but nonetheless, this game has some of the most memorable and interesting quests I have experienced in an RPG. So if you haven't played Cyberpunk before, or maybe haven't touched it since the disastrous launch, now is the perfect time to dive back into Night City and experience the incredible journey this game has to offer. Number 5. Divinity Original Sin 2. If you love Baldur's Gate 3, then it makes sense to check out Larian's earlier titles, the most celebrated of which is Divinity Original Sin 2. Now, full disclosure, this is the only game on the list that I have yet to play, but it's been recommended to me dozens and dozens of times by people who watch my videos and other RPG YouTubers as well. In fact, I think Mr. Matty Plays called DOS 2 the best RPG of its decade, which is a ringing endorsement. I did play the first Divinity Original Sin for about 25 hours, but ended up dropping it. The story and lore just weren't that interesting to me, and I had yet to fall in love with Larian's approach to turn-based combat. In fact, I didn't even really like turn-based combat until I played Baldur's Gate 3. But in any case, if you like BG3, then it makes sense to check out Larian's other games. I hope to play this in the very near future. Number 6. Wasteland 2 and 3. If Fallout and Baldur's Gate 3 had a baby, it would be called Wasteland. And yes, I know the original Wasteland came before Fallout and heavily inspired Fallout, so don't come at me in the comments. Released in 2014 by In Exile Entertainment, Wasteland 2 was a Kickstarter project that revived this long-dormant franchise. The post-nuclear apocalypse setting of Arizona is reminiscent of the early Fallout games. You control a squad of desert rangers who seek to provide some semblance of law and order in a post-apocalyptic wasteland overrun by raiders, mutated life forms, and robots. The sequel, Wasteland 3, was released in 2020. It had a bigger budget, higher presentation quality, and more beginner-friendly UI and mechanics. In Exile had more resources when developing Wasteland 3, owing to the success of their previous title and the fact that Microsoft bought the studio in 2018. Personally, I prefer the gameplay and setting of Wasteland 3, which is set in Colorado, by the way, and the faction struggles you encounter in 3 are absolutely wild. For instance, a cult of God-fearing Americans who worship an AI supercomputer based on President Ronald Reagan. But Wasteland 2 has a more interesting main story, particularly the ending of the game. It struggles with pacing though, and the early hours of the game are pretty slow before the dramatic conflict of the story really picks up. If I had to choose just one of these games, I'd go with Wasteland 3. You can jump into this series at any point, because the stories are relatively independent of one another, although there are some returning characters and background lore that you may better appreciate if you play Wasteland 2 first. Number 7. Pillars of Eternity 2. The early 2010s saw a revival of the isometric CRPG genre, with a bunch of different sequels and spiritual successors hitting the market. One of these was Obsidian's Pillars of Eternity series, which set itself up as a spiritual successor to the original Baldur's Gate games and other RPGs of that ilk. I have mixed feelings about the Pillars of Eternity games. They didn't resonate with me quite as much as Pathfinder or OG Baldur's Gate. They created their own rule set and lore apart from D&D, but it didn't end up capturing my attention in the same way as the classics. But a lot of RPG gamers rave about these games, so I wanted to include them on this list in case you end up loving Pillars more than I did. I'd definitely say Pillars of Eternity 2 is the better game in this series. Obsidian took a lot of fan feedback from the first game and incorporated it into the sequel. Plus, the overall setting of island hopping in an Italian-inspired land was more interesting than the generic high fantasy setting of the first game. I look forward to seeing what Obsidian does to expand this universe with their next game, Avowed. Number 8. Dragon Age Inquisition. This is the most newcomer-friendly Dragon Age game. It's also the most cinematic and largest in scope. BioWare really went all out with this game to create the most epic experience we've seen in this franchise to date. And that bet paid off as Inquisition went on to be the best-selling Dragon Age game, as well as netting a bunch of Game of the Year awards. One thing that's always impressed me about Inquisition is the fact that BioWare hired 4 different voice actors to play the protagonists. That way players can choose not only a gender, class, and race in character creation, but a unique voice as well. Inquisition also has some of my favorite companion characters from any video game, particularly Iron Bull, Varric, and Dorian. I like the feel of building your own organization, making decisions, and taking on an earth-shattering threat in the form of Corypheus and the Fade Rifts. Inquisition is not without its problems, though. The vast open zones are populated with a ton of meaningless fetch and kill quests. There's way too much loot and not enough inventory space, and the level gating of the main story can be pretty annoying as it drags the plot to a halt while you complete a bunch of random bullshit so you can progress. That being said, the combat and story are incredibly fun to experience, and despite its flaws, Inquisition is still my favorite game in the franchise. Number 9. The Witcher 3. This game truly needs no introduction, and it's one of the best RPGs ever made. The Witcher 3 provides an incredible open world to explore, tons of quests with meaningful choices, and a memorable cast of characters, including the Giga Chad Geralt of Rivia. Top all of this off with some of the best DLC ever made, and The Witcher 3 is a game I revisit annually at this point. If you like story-driven fantasy RPGs with meaningful choices, then you gotta play The Witcher 3. You won't regret it. Number 10. Mass Effect Legendary Edition. I'll never pass up an opportunity to recommend the Mass Effect trilogy. It is hands down my favorite video game franchise of all time. Mass Effect has some of the best world building, lore, and writing that I've ever seen in any video game, and its claim to fame are the plethora of impactful story choices that can have ripple effects into the sequels. So a choice you make in Mass Effect 1 can come back and impact the story all the way in Mass Effect 3. It's phenomenal, and no other franchise comes close to replicating this formula. On top of that, the combat is an incredibly fun mix of third-person shooting, squad-based team direction, and space magic. Mass Effect Legendary Edition in particular is the best bang for your buck in all of gaming, as you get 3 incredible games with all of its DLC, well, minus Pinnacle Station, for the price of a brand new AAA game. Mass Effect is an experience like no other, and if you liked Baldur's Gate 3, I have a strong suspicion you will enjoy these games as well. So there you have it. 10 games you should play after Baldur's Gate 3. Are there any games not on this list that you would recommend? Let me know in the comments section below. If you liked this video, be sure to subscribe to Big Dan Gaming for more BG3 and RPG videos. Big shout out to all the channel members for supporting my content. Until next time, this has been Big Dan. I should go.